Most people wake up every day believing they are making their own choices, steering their lives in the direction they want. They believe that with hard work, discipline, and a bit of luck, they can craft the future they dream about. But beneath this surface, confidence lies a hidden system of invisible forces, forces that Owen Hermstring, in The Law Behind the Laws, reveals to be far more powerful than most are willing to admit. These forces shape thoughts, feelings, desires, and actions long before we believe we've made a conscious decision. And the greatest irony? Most people never realize they're being controlled. Hermstring argues that society trains us to feel empowered by choices that are actually predetermined by belief systems, emotional conditioning, and unseen energetic patterns. We're handed frameworks early in life, through family, school, religion, media, and told these are the boundaries of what's possible, what's right, what's valuable. Within those boundaries, we are free to move, but step outside them, and the system begins to push back. The illusion of control is not freedom, it's a brilliantly disguised limitation. Imagine a child growing up in a household where money is always scarce. From a young age, they hear phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees, rich people are greedy," or "we can't afford that." As they grow, even if they develop ambition, that programming silently shapes their decisions. They may unconsciously sabotage opportunities that would create abundance because deep down they associate wealth with danger, betrayal, or disconnection. They believe they're making rational decisions, but the blueprint running their subconscious is pulling the strings. Hermstring writes that most people live on autopilot, not because they lack intelligence or willpower, but because they've never questioned the laws that govern their inner world. They try to change their lives from the outside, new jobs, new partners, new goals, without ever confronting the core frequency driving their experiences. It's like changing the furniture in a house while the foundation is still cracked. The structure will eventually collapse again, just in a new form. This illusion of control is reinforced by a culture obsessed with external validation. We're told success is about status, income, appearance, productivity, but those definitions keep us spinning in a loop, chasing approval, chasing perfection, chasing outcomes. When those outcomes don't bring the inner peace we expected, we double down, thinking we need to try harder, be better, work more. And in doing so, we fall deeper into the trap of thinking we're in control, when we're actually being led by invisible expectations we never chose. Hermstring explains that real freedom begins the moment we recognize how programmed we are. Awareness is the first crack in the illusion. When you start to notice your patterns, the way you always choose the same type of partner, the way you shrink when someone disapproves, the way you hesitate just before an opportunity, you begin to see the threads of control, and in that noticing, you create a gap, a space between the stimulus and your reaction. In that space lives the power to choose again. He calls this alignment with the source law, the deeper energetic truth beneath surface behavior. This law isn't about control through force, it's about surrendering to truth. And truth often feels like loss of identity, loss of certainty, loss of old stories. But it's in that shedding that authentic choice becomes possible. You stop reacting to life from old wounds and begin creating from clarity. There's a story Hermstring shares about a woman who spent her life seeking love, only to repeatedly end up with emotionally unavailable men. On the surface, she thought she was choosing partners who would challenge her and help her grow. But once she confronted the truth, that her nervous system associated inconsistency with love because of her childhood, she realized she had never been in control. Her patterns were choosing for her. Only after doing the deep inner work did she attract someone truly capable of intimacy. The law behind the laws had shifted, and so did her reality. So the question is not whether you are in control, but whether you are aware of what's actually controlling you. That's the gateway to transformation. As Hermstring writes, the most dangerous lie is the one that feels like freedom. Only when you dare to confront the invisible can you finally begin to choose, not out of habit, not out of fear, but out of truth. Most people move through life believing they are in full control of their choices, their actions, their destiny. They believe they are free agents, making rational decisions at every turn. But what if that freedom is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? Owen Hermstring argues that the perception of free will is often a veil covering the intricate web of programming, conditioning, trauma, and unconscious beliefs that truly govern our behavior. From the moment we are born, we are indoctrinated into a system of control. Parents, teachers, religious institutions, the media, all act as architects of our internal blueprint. We are taught what to believe, what to fear, what success means, and what failure looks like. By the time we are adults, our choices are often nothing more than automatic responses shaped by these early influences. Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, "The average person mistakes reaction for choice. They believe they've chosen, when in fact, they've only complied." Take, for example, the notion of career paths. Many pursue professions not because they feel a genuine calling, but because societal narratives glorify them. A young man becomes a lawyer not out of passion for justice, but because he was told it's prestigious. A woman avoids entrepreneurship because she was conditioned to seek security, not risk. These decisions appear to be chosen, but they're dictated by layers of mental scripts that run quietly in the background. Hermstring invites us to observe these scripts, to track down the voice behind our decisions. Is it truly yours, or is it your father's voice warning you not to fail? Is it your own dream, or the one your culture sold you as the only acceptable version of success? This illusion of choice becomes most dangerous when it relates to our patterns of suffering. A person who constantly attracts emotionally unavailable partners might tell themselves, "This is just my type." But Hermstring challenges this by asking, what made that your type? Is it unresolved childhood abandonment? Is it a subconscious attempt to recreate and resolve a pain that was never properly confronted? These patterns persist not because they're chosen, but because they are familiar, and familiarity is a deceptive form of comfort. The trap is that these unconscious programs reward us with a false sense of control. We tell ourselves, "I decided this," as a way to feel empowered. But true empowerment only comes when we unravel the programming behind the decision. Hermstring often emphasizes that true free will only begins when you can distinguish between the self that was shaped and the self that is. He writes, "The you that speaks from pain is not the you that speaks from power. Know the difference." Another powerful illusion is the belief that more information will free us. In today's digital age, we consume vast amounts of content, hoping that with enough knowledge we will become more self-aware, more capable of choosing better. But this creates an intellectual loop, where knowledge accumulates, but transformation never arrives. Why? Because transformation is not about knowing more, but about becoming someone who acts from deeper awareness. True change comes not from knowing you have a fear of abandonment, but from choosing to stop living according to it. Not from identifying your scarcity mindset, but from acting as someone who no longer believes in lack. These actions cannot be generated from willpower alone. They must be born from clarity. And clarity comes when the illusion of free will is pierced. So what does it look like to live beyond the illusion? Hermstring describes it as radical responsibility. It's the decision to question every reaction, to pause before choosing, to ask, who's really speaking here, before committing to a path. It is the relentless pursuit of inner truth, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. It's not glamorous. In fact, it often means letting go of everything you were taught to value, but it is liberating. In this way, those who awaken to the law behind the laws begin to reclaim their power. They begin to act from a space untouched by societal programming. They don't chase validation, they don't fear disapproval, and they don't outsource their identity to others. They become unpredictable to the system because they are no longer reacting in predictable patterns. Hermstring summarizes this beautifully. When you stop playing the roles they gave you, you finally meet the author inside you. The law behind the laws begins to reveal itself the moment you stop assuming your decisions are your own. The more you question, the more free you become. Not free in the surface sense, but in the deep, unshakable sense of inner sovereignty. So the next time you make a choice, big or small, pause, trace it back. Ask yourself, is this me or my programming? Is this freedom or familiarity? The answer might change everything. Every day, without noticing, people sign invisible contracts. These aren't written on paper, nor are they spoken aloud. They exist in the subconscious as agreements formed between your fears and your behaviors, between your wounds and your relationships, between your need for love and your willingness to abandon yourself to get it. Owen Hermstring refers to these as invisible agreements, and they are some of the most powerful forces shaping a person's reality. The tragedy is that most people don't know they've signed anything at all. In The Law Behind the Laws, Hermstring explains, every moment you choose comfort over truth, silence over confrontation, or compliance over authenticity, you are signing an agreement. You are saying, I agree to stay small in order to feel safe. And once that agreement is in place, your reality will organize itself to honor it, whether or not it's in your favor. Let's take a simple example. A child who grows up being criticized whenever they express anger may unconsciously agree, if I never show anger, I'll be loved. That agreement doesn't disappear with age. It mutates into adult behavior, people-pleasing, boundarylessness, smiling through discomfort, avoiding conflict. And every time that adult suppresses their frustration or remains silent to keep the peace, they reinforce the contract, signing it over and over again without knowing. The result? A life that seems externally peaceful but internally exhausting. A reality that rewards compliance but punishes authenticity. Another common agreement is around worth. Someone who was emotionally neglected might grow up with the internalized message, my needs are too much. If I'm invisible, I'll be accepted. This turns into chronic under-asking, under-receiving, or even undercharging for their work. Success always seems just out of reach, not because of lack of skill, but because they are unknowingly living by a rule they didn't write, but once accepted as law. These invisible contracts aren't just personal, they're social. Think of how society conditions individuals to agree to a rhythm of life. Go to school, get a job, climb the ladder, retire. Questioning that rhythm often leads to judgment or isolation, so most silently sign the agreement. I will live by the script to feel safe and approved, and the system thrives because of these collective unspoken contracts. Hermstring warns, however, that these agreements have energetic consequences. You pay for them with your peace, your purpose, and your potential. The cost of denying your truth, he writes, is living a life that doesn't feel like your own. So how do you break these contracts? The first step is awareness. You must identify where you are living in contradiction, where your behavior does not align with your desire. If you long for deep connection but never express vulnerability, ask, what am I protecting? If you dream of abundance but always play it safe, ask, what am I afraid of losing? Most often, what you're protecting is an agreement formed in pain. Breaking that agreement will feel like betrayal, not of others, but of the wounded version of you who believed that safety came through self-abandonment. You'll feel guilt for wanting more, fear for being seen, shame for standing out. But that's the signal you're getting close to freedom. Hermstring suggests writing these contracts down, literally. Finish the sentence. I agree to choose in order to feel choose. You might be surprised what comes up. I agree to dim my light in order to feel accepted. I agree to avoid asking for help in order to feel in control. These are not conscious choices, but they govern you until you make them conscious. Once identified, the power lies in your ability to revoke them. You do this not by fighting them directly, but by embodying their opposite. If the agreement is to stay quiet, begin to speak. If the agreement is to stay small, start to take up space, emotionally, physically, financially. If the agreement is to play safe, do one bold thing each day. Repetition creates new contracts. The key here is not perfection, but pattern disruption. Every time you act against the invisible agreement, you weaken it. You break the cycle. You send a new message to your nervous system. I can be me and still be safe. Over time, that becomes the new contract, not rooted in fear, but in truth. It's important to recognize that breaking these contracts will trigger the people around you. After all, they've made their own agreements, often ones that depend on you remaining the same. Your growth may feel like abandonment to them. Your voice may sound like rebellion, but that's not your burden to carry. Hermstring closes this idea with one of his most powerful insights. Freedom is not given. It is reclaimed, one broken agreement at a time. When you begin to see the invisible contracts you've signed, you can finally decide whether they deserve your signature. Most don't. Most were forged in survival, but you are no longer just surviving, and your life deserves to be authored by your soul, not your past. This is the work. This is how you take back your reality. Owen Hermstring states with disconcerting clarity, reality doesn't show you what you want. It shows you what you are. This is one of the central laws of his book, The Law Behind the Laws, and one of the most difficult to accept because it removes us from the position of victims of chance and confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. We are co-creators of the pain we experience. Not punitively but reflectively, reality acts like a mirror, and not an external, direct mirror, but a vibrational mirror. It reflects back to you the emotional and energetic patterns that are active within you, especially those you still refuse to see. This is why you can spend years blaming the world for rejections, scarcity, betrayals, and frustrations, without realizing that you are trapped in a cycle that revolves around unhealed wounds. Imagine a person who was abandoned by their father as a child. They grow up with the pain of abandonment, pulsing like an invisible wound. And although you long with all your soul to be loved and chosen, your subtle energy emits an unconscious frequency: people leave me. This belief, unspoken but felt, becomes a silent invitation for experiences that validate you. And so, distant partners, friends who disappear, jobs that end without explanation, continue to appear in your life. Hermstring writes, "Reality is loyal to your frequency, not your fantasy." In other words, you don't attract what you say you want, you attract what you vibrate most deeply. And often your vibration is anchored in the parts you've never dared to face. The rational mind tries to justify it. People are selfish, the world is unfair, and nobody wants commitment. But the mirror doesn't respond to the rational mind. It responds to the unconscious. It reflects your wounds so you can see them, not to punish you, but to free you. Another powerful example, someone who for a long time felt invisible. Ignored in childhood, perhaps by busy or emotionally unavailable parents, they grow up feeling like they have to work hard to be noticed, that they have no intrinsic value. This pain leads to two paths. Either they become a constant performer, always trying to prove their worth, exhausted and dependent on external validation, or they withdraw completely, avoiding any visibility to avoid being rejected again. Either way, reality delivers more of the same. Effort goes unacknowledged, silence goes unheard, opportunities go unnoticed, and the cycle repeats. The key, according to Hermstring, is to shift your perspective. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the question becomes, "What does this reflect in me?" Because what bothers you most about the other person is often a reflection of something you're hiding from yourself, a fear, a trauma, a repressed emotion. This is why two people can experience the same situation but react in completely different ways. One loses her temper in the face of criticism. Another listens, is grateful, and moves on. The difference isn't in the criticism itself, but in what it reflects. For the first, perhaps it triggers an old wound of invalidation. For the second, perhaps the criticism doesn't find an open wound, just curiosity and self-knowledge. Hermstring invites the reader to use reality as a tool for healing. Instead of running away from uncomfortable situations, he proposes looking at them with radical honesty. What if this isn't happening to break you, but to show you where you're still broken? This shift in perspective transforms victims into masters. It transforms suffering into wisdom, but it's not easy. Because looking in the mirror requires courage. It requires letting go of excuses, blame, and disguises. You have to accept that what you most want to change in the outer world will only change when it's transformed in the inner world. And here's the twist. When you heal the wound, the reflection changes. The person who heals the pain of abandonment begins to attract people who are present. Those who heal the feeling of invisibility become naturally noticed. Those who face the fear of failure discover doors that were always there, but which the vibration of scarcity prevented them from seeing. Because when the frequency changes, reality responds. Hermstring sums it up simply and brutally. If your life keeps showing you the same pain, it's because you haven't yet become the person who no longer needs that mirror. Reality is the mirror of the soul, and the soul wants to be free. There is a line in Owen Hermstring's book that strikes like lightning. Before you knew what money was, what love meant, or what God could be, you already made an agreement about them. This is the basis of what he calls the hidden contracts, silent, unspoken, subconscious agreements we form with life, long before we have the tools to understand what we are doing. And yet, these contracts become the invisible scripts that govern everything we allow, everything we attract, and everything we sabotage. A hidden contract is not written in ink. It's written in emotion, in trauma, in survival. For instance, a child who witnesses his parents fight every night over money may unconsciously create the belief, money breaks families. This belief hardens into a contract. If I want to stay safe and keep love, I must never have too much money. That contract becomes law, not in society, but in the subconscious. And the subconscious always obeys the contract. So even if that person grows up and dreams of wealth, works hard, studies finance, builds businesses, they will find themselves mysteriously hitting a ceiling, losing money right when success was close, burning out right before the breakthrough, choosing partners who waste, steal, or fear money, because deep down they are loyal to a contract they forgot they signed. Hermstring explains this clearly in The Law Behind the Laws. You don't need to remember the contract for it to control you. It only needs to remain unchallenged. That's the terrifying part. These contracts don't operate at the surface. They don't speak in sentences. They speak in patterns, repetitions, feelings of stuckness, fear, guilt, unworthiness. They whisper, "You're not allowed to go there." And when you try to break them, your reality pushes back. You'll face resistance that feels external, but it's internal, projected outward. Take another example. A young girl grows up in a home where being quiet and agreeable is the only way to avoid conflict. She internalizes, speaking up creates danger. Her contract becomes, to be safe, I must never be fully seen. Years later, this woman may want to be a leader, a speaker, a creator, but she'll feel paralyzed every time she tries. Not because she lacks talent, but because her subconscious is protecting her from breaking the contract. Her own nervous system believes visibility equals threat, so it sabotages her courage in the name of keeping her safe. This is why Hermstring says that transformation is not about motivation, it's about renegotiation. You must first identify the contracts you're living by, then you must consciously tear them up and replace them with new ones. Contracts written in truth, not fear. And that's not a one-day process. It's a confrontation with your past. A recognition of how many of your adult decisions are still being dictated by a frightened child. He writes, "Most people live by contracts signed when they were too young to know the cost, and the cost is high. Joy, love, abundance, expression, peace." So how do we find these contracts? Hermstring suggests starting with the recurring blocks in your life, the moments where you feel like you're hitting an invisible wall, when a certain kind of relationship always ends the same way. When money never seems to stay, when peace feels foreign. Instead of blaming circumstances, ask, what agreement might I be keeping alive? Then go deeper. When did that pattern begin? Who taught you that? Not just in words, but in behavior. What did you decide about life when you were in pain? And have you ever updated that decision? Because that's the key. These contracts are not destiny. They are not curses. They are simply outdated survival strategies. They made sense once, when you were small, helpless, scared. But now they only hold you back. To move forward, you must become the version of yourself who no longer needs to be protected by fear. Hermstring puts it like this: you can only create a new reality if you stop obeying the laws you never chose. That means healing. That means seeing your life not as random, but as scripted, and realizing you're both the author and the actor. You may need to write new contracts. I am safe when I am seen. Abundance supports love, it doesn't destroy it. I can be powerful and still be loved. I don't need to shrink to stay connected. Each new belief becomes a line in the new agreement, but it only becomes law when you live by it, consistently, bravely, even when the old contract tries to reassert itself. And it will. You'll feel fear. You'll feel doubt. You'll want to run back to the old identity. But now you know that's just the echo of the expired contract. You don't owe it your future, because your life will always reflect the agreement you live by. If you want a new reality, you must sign a new contract. In The Law Behind the Laws, Owen Hermstring introduces a concept that disrupts the foundation of traditional self-help. The universe doesn't respond to your wishes, your plans, or even your words. It responds to your emotional signature. That phrase alone demands a shift in how we understand reality. Because if it's true, then your life isn't being shaped by what you want. It's being shaped by what you feel most often. This is why so many people who try affirmations, vision boards, manifestation rituals, and journaling exercises see little change. They're operating on the surface, while their emotional baseline remains unchanged. And that baseline is the signal being broadcast to the universe at all times, not through words, but through vibration, through presence, through embodiment. Your emotional signature is a combination of your most consistent emotions, what you feel when you wake up, what you expect when things get hard, what you believe you're allowed to experience. It is the invisible ink on the contract you live by. And no matter what you say you want, your reality will be loyal to what you feel is familiar. Hermstring writes, "You don't manifest what you want, you manifest what you normalize." If you normalize abandonment, you'll recreate it, not because you want pain, but because it feels like home. If you normalize rejection, you'll self-sabotage anything that smells like acceptance. If you normalize scarcity, no amount of money will ever feel like enough. You'll burn through it, fear it, or feel unworthy of keeping it. And here's the trap. Most people think they need to think their way into a better life, but your thoughts are not your strongest signal. Your emotions are. That's what Hermstring calls emotional gravity. Whatever you emotionally believe to be true will pull everything else toward it. People, experiences, outcomes, even your interpretation of events. Let's say you're someone who grew up feeling like love was always conditional. You may have learned that to be loved, you had to overperform, please others, hide your needs. As an adult, you may find yourself in relationships where you feel unseen, where you give more than you receive, where you tolerate emotional starvation. Why? Because your emotional signature still says, love requires sacrifice. Now imagine trying to manifest a deeply fulfilling, nourishing, mutual love. You can write about it, visualize it, even cry for it. But until your emotional signature changes, you will reject or distort anything that contradicts your current baseline. That's why Hermstring emphasizes, reality doesn't care what you say you deserve. It cares what you emotionally accept. So how do you change your emotional signature? You begin with awareness. Track your dominant emotional states for a week, not just in crisis, but in the mundane. How do you feel while brushing your teeth, walking to work, sitting in silence? What's your background hum? Is it tension, dread, resentment, anxiety? Because that is what you're feeding your future. Then you gently introduce a new emotional state, not through force but through exposure. You find moments, memories, environments that allow you to feel peace, joy, abundance, love, even for a second, and you return to them. You rehearse the new feeling until it becomes more familiar than the old one. That's the secret, not intensity. Consistency. Hermstring explains, change doesn't happen when you feel better. It happens when better becomes your baseline. This is not about toxic positivity. It's not about faking happiness or ignoring pain. It's about recognizing that your emotional body has been trained, often by trauma, rejection, or neglect, to expect disappointment. And now healing means retraining that body to expect alignment, goodness, safety. There's a passage in the book that illustrates this powerfully. You don't need to earn joy. You just need to stop arguing with it when it knocks on your door. That's the challenge. Most people don't push joy away with word. They do it with fear, with hesitation, with unworthiness. They brace for it to leave before it even arrives. But if you want a new life, you must create a new emotional home for it to live in. Start small. Where in your life do you already feel the emotion you want more of? Even for 5 minutes. Hold on to that moment. Amplify it. Revisit it daily. Because that feeling is not just a reward. It's a key, a frequency, a blueprint. And the more time you spend there, the more your outer world will begin to reflect that inner truth. So don't chase manifestations. Don't chase symbols. Chase the feeling that you think those things will give you. And when you anchor that feeling, the things will come, not as miracles, but as mirrors. Because life always matches your emotional signature, and until that changes, nothing else will. From the moment you take your first breath, society begins to teach you a set of rules, not written in books or laws, but embedded in culture, reward systems, and punishments. It's an invisible curriculum. And Owen Hermstring argues that this curriculum is designed not to awaken you, but to keep you distracted, compliant, and disconnected from the true laws that govern your reality. In The Law Behind the Laws, Hermstring writes, "We are not raised to become conscious creators. We are raised to become efficient consumers." That one sentence explains the dilemma so many people face. You were not taught to question reality. You were taught to adapt to it, to accept suffering as noble, struggle as necessary, obedience as virtue. Think about school. You're not taught how to feel, only how to memorize. You're not taught to trust your inner voice, only to obey authority. Creativity is graded. Silence is punished. Originality is called disruption. By the time you reach adulthood, your mind has been programmed to seek validation externally and to equate safety with sameness. This is how the system works. It doesn't need to silence your soul. It just needs to keep you busy enough that you forget you have one. Hermstring calls this the first layer of deception, the belief that reality is fixed, that your role is to survive within it, not shape it. So most people live in reaction mode. They wait for things to happen, they wait for love, for luck, for approval, for permission. And when it doesn't come, they assume something is wrong with them, not with the system. But the truth is far more radical. The system is built to keep you asleep. Why? Because someone who is fully awake, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, cannot be controlled. They don't chase status. They don't fear rejection. They don't crave power. They create it from within. And that kind of person is dangerous to any structure built on fear, hierarchy, or scarcity. Hermstring emphasizes, society rewards the version of you that is most disconnected from your essence. The you that smiles to be polite. The you that works jobs you hate to afford things you don't need. The you that stays silent to avoid confrontation. The you that apologizes for being too intense, too sensitive, too honest. That version of you? It's socially acceptable because it's spiritually asleep. And here lies the paradox. The more asleep you are, the more you fit in. The more awake you become, the more isolated you might feel, at least at first, because waking up is disruptive. It means saying no to what everyone else says yes to. It means questioning the job, the relationship, the religion, the roles you inherited without consent. But that disruption is sacred. It's the beginning of remembering. Hermstring explains that when people begin to awaken to the law behind the laws, they often feel lost or depressed. Not because they're broken, but because the old structures no longer hold. The lies stop working. The masks become too heavy. You can't pretend anymore. And that's terrifying, but it's also freedom. There's a powerful passage in the book that says, "You are not here to perform normal. You are here to embody truth, and truth is rarely convenient." This is where most people turn back. They taste the truth, but find it too bitter, too lonely, too expensive. They don't realize that the cost of awakening is temporary, but the cost of staying asleep is eternal. Because staying asleep means outsourcing your power. It means making decisions based on fear. It means living in a loop where the same patterns, toxic love, financial instability, emotional numbness, keep showing up, not because you're cursed, but because your blueprint hasn't changed. And here's the real tragedy. Most people die as strangers to themselves. So how do you begin to escape this invisible curriculum? By questioning everything that feels normal. Who told you success meant exhaustion? Who taught you love must be earned? Who convinced you your worth is conditional? Start there. Interrogate every belief you didn't consciously choose. Next, rebuild your inner authority. Make decisions based on resonance, not reputation. Follow your energy, not the applause. If something drains your spirit, it is not for you, no matter how logical it looks on paper. And finally, remember this. Awakening isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Hermstring reminds us, the most powerful form of rebellion is not violence, it is alignment, because nothing threatens the system more than a human who knows who they are. So if you've ever felt out of place, like you were born for something more, that feeling is not wrong, it's the seed of your awakening. Don't suppress it, don't numb it, nourish it. Because it will lead you back to the law beneath the laws. The one no school ever taught you, but your soul never forgot. You were not meant to fit in. You were meant to remember. Most people stop at knowledge. They read the books, watch the videos, nod in agreement and feel a flicker of recognition. But then nothing changes. Because understanding is not the same as transformation. You don't heal your life just by knowing the truth. You change your life by becoming it. And this is where the true journey begins. Owen Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, "Wisdom that is not embodied becomes another form of illusion. The mind collects truths it cannot carry, and the soul starves beneath the weight." This is the final challenge. After seeing through the illusions, after discovering the hidden patterns and invisible forces, will you dare to live differently? It's easy to identify the false systems that shape your life. The economic traps, the emotional conditioning, the spiritual bypassing, but dismantling them inside yourself. That's sacred work. That's the real revolution, because it requires radical honesty, the kind of honesty that burns away everything you thought made you lovable or successful or safe. To embody the law behind the laws, you must be willing to lose the identity you built to survive the world you no longer belong to. Hermstring speaks of a moment, often quiet and deeply personal, when the soul no longer tolerates performance. You stop pretending to be okay in relationships that drain you. You stop chasing money that costs your peace. You stop trying to convince the world of your worth. And in that stillness, something ancient rises, the truth of who you are, not the version that earned applause, the version that remembers the original agreement you made with life. That agreement wasn't to be liked. It wasn't to play small, it wasn't to fit in, it was to awaken. And awakening isn't a moment, it's a practice, it's 1,000 choices every day to return to truth, to breathe deeper when fear rises, to pause before reacting, to speak when silence is complicit, to listen when pride wants to interrupt, to walk away when your soul whispers, "This is not your path." Because the law behind the laws isn't something you worship, it's something you live. And it lives through your boundaries, your softness, your depth, your clarity. It lives in your refusal to betray yourself. It lives in the way you show up when no one's watching. It lives in the tears you honor instead of suppress, in the joy you allow instead of earn, in the intuition you follow even when it makes no sense. Hermstring reminds us that the greatest shifts are often invisible. No one sees the moment you choose love over fear. No one applauds the time you forgave yourself instead of self-punishing. No one claps when you walk away from what doesn't serve your soul, but that's where power lives, not in performance, but in presence. He writes, "The world you see is a mirror of the frequency you embody. Change your energy and your life cannot remain the same." This is the core of the book, the thread that ties every law together. Reality responds to resonance, not words, not wants, not effort. Resonance. You don't attract what you say you want. You attract what you are willing to become. So how do you complete this journey? You stop waiting for the world to change. You stop blaming your past, your parents, your partners. You stop outsourcing your healing, and you begin, slowly, painfully, beautifully, to become the person who no longer needs the illusion. You become the space where truth feels safe. You become the parent your inner child needed. You become the love you kept begging others to give. You become the mirror of a different world, and the more you embody this frequency, the less the old world holds power over you. Its threats lose grip, its rewards lose appeal, its stories lose meaning. Because you have remembered something older than fear, the divine intelligence that shaped you long before anyone told you who to be. Owen Hermstring closes his book with these words, "When you live from the law behind the laws, you no longer chase reality, you create it." That is the final shift from consumer to creator, from puppet to poet, from victim of circumstance to architect of resonance, not through ego, but through embodiment. So if you've made it this far, know this: your soul is ready. It has always been. The pain, the breakdowns, the confusion, they were not signs of failure. They were signs of awakening. The old shell had to crack so the light could enter. And now the choice is yours. Will you go back to sleep, or will you live what you know? This is your invitation to remember, to embody, to become. Because the law behind the laws is not a theory. It's who you are before the world taught you.